Kia ora koutou. Good afternoon, everybody. So we are here for workshop 8 of our long-term plan amendment series. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's just move on. So today we are getting those final details for the consultation material, also discussing the draft consultation document and the consultation approach. So today, stepping through the different parts and where we need to get to, we'll start with the rates review. Jacinta will provide you an update, and from this we'll need a steer on your preferred option for inclusion in the draft consultation material. Second, development contributions. We have an updated table for you and also seek a steer for consultation material. Fees and charges, a further update and again a steer needed. The landfill, discussed last week and just need a steer on the preferred option today. Then we'll move into working through the draft consultation document, taking your suggestions, any red flags. And then Lisa Campbell will talk about the consultation and communications approach, events and messaging, and your opportunities for involvement. So, moving into rates review.
Thanks, and apologies, I was just scared it was going to die power-wise. So this first view just is for informational purposes, but we talked about last time giving a view of what the rates looked like, including it, so what was water and what was excluding water. So the green line is the view with the full rates increase that's proposed of the long-term plan amendment, and then the blue gives a view of what the water is, and the green what it is excluding water. So you can see in the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the significant driver of the cost increases is around water. So I won't dwell on that one too much. We'll jump into the rates review, but just wanted to make sure that you had that view as well.
Sorry, Jacinta, can you just go back to that? So even if Free Waters goes on the 1st of January, the 1st of July 2024, we will still see rates increases due to including water.
So if as of 1 July 2024,
yeah,
when it changes, you would see that we would have a very small rates increase.
I see. So what you're saying there is that if no Three Waters, that will be the increase with the blue line.
Yeah,
yep.
That's right. And apologies, I just need to quickly update that. Actually, that's 2020. The years aren't quite right in there. Yeah, I've linked onto the wrong year. Yeah, so without water, you'd effectively say once Three Waters changes, the green would be effectively Council's position.
Cool.
Yeah. So in terms of the rates review and where we're at compared to the last plan, there's been a significant amount of work done at an individual property level in terms of detailed review. And that's both part of the process of what you would do and also leading up to the consultation document. In terms of that review, that has identified, I know you've received an email, there's a couple of things as part of that review that were identified as issues in terms of the data that you have been provided in the past. Apologies for that, but I wanted to explain what they were and give you a way forward in terms of where we are. So in terms of, there's a couple of things specifically that I wanted to mention. So option 1, which is the move from general rates from land value to capital value. Initially, the data that you had a differential still applied to the farming area. So effectively, rural were looking a lot better off than was intended in terms of the conversations that we've had. And as well in that, in terms of the revaluation option for 2023. So it doesn't impact the option necessarily because it's based on 2023, but it does impact your ability to look at the analysis. So when you saw the 2023 with revaluation only, that option assumed that the same dollar amount of general rates sat within the residential and within the rural farming area. So effectively, because the land value had dropped in rural, it was it was not creating the correct balance between the two. So those two things were issues that were identified through the process. So what I'm going to do now is to allow you to really get into it and understand for yourselves what's going on with the properties in your individual areas of the district. I have in the portal, you have an Excel workbook that's saved within your portal. What I'm intending to do today is to talk you through the analysis and suggestions and recommendations in terms of where we might want to land, but as well to provide you with some understanding of how to look through that information so that you can spend some time yourselves between now and the point where you need to make decisions and really understand what's happening for who and where. I think there are some significant changes, even if we talk about rural farming, for example, within it. A move to capital value is going to, if you've got a hugely land-based farm, where it might be a sheep and beef, for example, they're not going to have a significant difference between land value and capital value because they don't have a lot of buildings and equipment on the property. The likes of a poultry farm, for example, will have significant buildings and other outbuildings and other equipment, and not equipment, but significant buildings on the property. So when you move to capital value, that would have the impact of a significant increase for those properties because it's now based on not only on the value of the land, but also on the value of the buildings. So those types of things, when you talk about rural farming, might not be that different overall, but within that, there are some significant changes within the different sectors.
Jacinta, could you just talk about the existing differential?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if that's been well understood.
So in terms of the general rate as it sits at the moment, as of the last time the rates were reviewed, which was in the last long-term plan, previous to that, there was a differential, and what that meant was a certain percentage of the general rate would be allocated to the rural area, and the rest would be allocated to the rest of the district. That changed a little bit with this last long-term plan, in that a decision was made to base it all on land value, but to give those properties which are deemed as farming or horticultural in nature, and that relates to properties that are predominantly used for farming, agricultural type purposes, 50% a differential. So what that means is for every dollar of land value that a residential property pays or any other property pays, then a rural farming property would pay 50% of that cost. At the last time that long-term plan was done, there were some areas of the district that were significantly impacted by that decision. Those ones were, when you look at some of the analysis in there, are what we deem rural other. Those are properties that are within the rural area, but they're not a farm. They're not used as ancillary land for farms. They're not a horticultural operation. And so the likes of, for example, a makahika, or where they might have a significant area of land, but they're not deemed a farm or rural horticultural. So they don't receive that differential. So that was quite a big change, where previously they would have received a reduced rate. So that was something that in the last long-term plan was a change that for some people in the district, the likes of some of the, be careful not to mention names, apologies, some of the significant business operations that might not be farming within the rural area used to receive a differential, and then it was changed so that they didn't anymore. So that's sort of the pathway of where we got to in terms of where we are today. Now it's the conversation about, is it more appropriate to base our general rate on land value or on capital value? And so because of some of the changes that we've talked about, what I've made sure that you can see in the analysis that you've got is you've got a main piece of analysis. You can see where that property sits. Is it rural? Is it residential? You can also see highest ratepayers to lowest ratepayers and get a sense of, for some of those significantly large ratepayers, how is that changing their properties and some of the reasons for those increases. In terms of the options and what I've looked at in terms of, and we'll step into a little bit more at this stage, and I'll talk through the reasons why in a minute. We had looked at changing from our general rate from land value to capital value with no differential, so no difference between any parts of the district other than the fact that their rates for the general rate would be based on capital value. And we also talked about the option of moving the representation and governance rate from a targeted rate into the general rate. Given the changes or the issues that were identified in the last week and the analysis that you'll see, in terms of that rural farming sector and some of the changes that might land on that area in terms of moving not only from land value to capital value, but then shifting more from the targeted rates onto the general rate, it may be a step too far for that community at this stage. We did talk about options about considering listing. Councillor Boyle mentioned, for example, at the last meeting, we talked about, would you have an appetite to shift particular targeted rates to capital value in the next round? That's something that could be looked at as part of a stage 2. All of the analysis is there for you regardless, so you can look at the different options and the different impacts. But I'll mention the reasons why, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention up front. I've also included an option of an 80% differential for rural farming. And that stems around some of the impacts on some of the, some properties have hundreds of percent increases, given the fact that they have high capital value relative to their land value. But you can have a look at those yourselves and assess what your thoughts are. And it's really stemming back to that, linking back to that policy decision that you need to think about yourselves. What do you as a table think is the most equitable way to share out rates for the general rate? Is it reasonable to assume that capital value, taking into account the buildings and other parts of value on that land, should be considered in sharing that rate? Or is land value more appropriate? So that in terms of a principle, it's important that you think about that and consider what you think is fair first before you go in and look at the impacts on some of the properties, because that will affect what your view is, but it's good to think about that first. The recommendation at this stage is, as a suggestion, is to look at the option of moving from general rate from land value to capital value and leaving the targeted rates out at this stage. I'll step through the analysis now, but I just thought I'd mention that up front. So you'll have this view in your file when you look at it. Currently, in terms of the 2023 rates, and I'll step on some of the ones that are going to change it significantly. So even if we don't change rates at all, we have 2023 rates, but we just have the revaluation change. With the shift in all of the different areas of the district in terms of value, that significantly reduces the share that rural farming properties pay. So even if you say, look, I think we want to hold off on this rates review for now, even if you did nothing today in terms of policy change with rates, this would be the impact that you would see, because we absolutely have to include that valuation change because it's part of our legislative process. That would have a sizable change in terms of reducing the amount that the rural farming sector pay, increasing the amount significantly that the residential sector pay, not really changing much in terms of what happens with the utilities. A little bit of an increase for rural other, but not significant. The biggest impact is really between rural and residential. Then the increases around the rates increase. So that increases us from 52.8 million up to 57.7. and just noting that this excludes water meters at this stage. And you can see with that alone, that sort of brings up the impact of where rural farming sort of stepped back to where they were prior to the valuation change. Some of the reason why they step up so much more than would the residential sector, for example, is because they don't have the majority of the cost increases. So water had a very small increase because those rural farming properties don't typically pay for water or wastewater or stormwater. Then they don't get the benefit of that low water change, and so they're effectively paying us on an average basis a higher increase than the rest of the district, because our general rates, our targeted rates have all increased at a larger rate than has our water rate for year one. And that was a specific decision made by this table to try and limit the level of the rates increase. So as well with this bringing in this, the option one as well, this brings in the effect of the revaluation change in terms of moving to capital value. So at an overall level, that rural farming doesn't change, the overall level, that doesn't change, I'll start again. This is just the 2024 rates, including the reval. I've renamed them silly names by accident. So then in terms of option 2, option 1 assumes nothing else changes other than the reval. Option 2 then says, okay, we know we've got a revaluation. Let's look at moving from land value to capital value. So in terms of what that does across the district is, in terms of utilities, we know that they have a significantly high capital value. And in a lot of areas, they don't necessarily have much in terms of land value. So from a rating perspective, that has a significant increase in terms of sharing more of the rates with the utility sector than before.
Just a question. Because the utilities includes a huge chunk of our assets, for year one at least, there would need to be a corresponding rates increase to cover the cost of those rates. So is that factored in the rate change, like for option? So which one is it? It's option 3. Well, yeah. So for option 3 and beyond, does it have the corresponding increase then to rates or not?
It's a good question, and no, it doesn't specifically. It was assumed in there that overall that any increase in terms of water rates for that area would go through borrowings on the assumption that that's what you would have previously. That's the logic of what you've previously decided through the budget review. That can absolutely change, but that was the logic around it. Yeah.
So just another question. In terms of rural other, which we just spoke about, option 2, obviously, that's quite a sizable chunk there. Are we not going to end up relitigating what happened last year? Because wasn't there you said 50%, but I understood, didn't we come down to 50 cents? 50 cents sticks in my mind somewhere where 50 cents in each dollar was that. Is that right?
So
that was rural other, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't rural other. That's rural farming. So for every dollar, it's 50 cents. So for every dollar, it's rural farming. That's right. So for areas where it was deemed to be part of the farming operation, then they were classified within that rural farming group rather than in other. Yes, they are the significant ones to look at, but also the big kicker there with these ones is for those rural other, it's the valuation that's driven that change. If you look at those and go in and filter on rural other, and you'll see the significant increases in value, both land value and capital value that those properties are experiencing. So really, the change that we're suggesting or that you need to work through is the change that we're looking at is actually a change from 8.4 million to 8.6 million, because this is not a policy decision. This is a result of a revaluation and a rates increase. So they are seeing a sizable rates increase, absolutely, here. But it's not a result of a policy change, yeah. Yeah, this is definitely one where it's absolutely, so I didn't include the names because from a privacy, but it's absolutely worth filtering on that area and saying, do I understand what that means? Does that make sense to me? One thing I included in there for you as well is the share of the land value that each property has, both before and after the rates review, before and after the valuation, and also the share of the capital value that that property has, both before and after. So you can start to understand sort of what share of the value of the district does it hold, and how significantly has that changed. And it's not, I think it's until you actually start to look at individual ones and work through the logic of them, that you start to form your views on whether you're comfortable. So we've talked about the rural other. So in terms of any decision between looking at option 1 or looking at option 3, where you might pull back on the increase to the rural farming area in terms of offering some form of differential, overall you'd see though that what that does is that actually decreases overall the level of rates that they're currently paying. But within that, there are significant changes within that sector, and that depends on the type of farm or agricultural property that they are. Then you'll see as well, in terms of the different analysis, you'll see the different parts of the change that are due to reval, due to the rates increase, and due to the rates review. So you'll be able to see the individual components. Now I know that there is, and for those members of the public, I'm happy to share the presentation as well. It's just so within your worksheets as well, you'll also have a summary of the significant changes. And I'm not going to go through the detail of them, but what I want to just highlight, for example, is within the areas that's within the businesses in the district, we have 4 properties that will have an increase of more than 50%. So why have they got a decrease of more than 50%? Their capital value was less than 500,000, and they had a lower than 50% increase in their valuation. So they got, relative to others, they haven't had a significant increase, and as well, their value is worth less than the median value across the district. So those are the types of explanations that hopefully will help you to work through and understand the different impacts. For example, for that property, they currently pay, those 4 properties currently pay 2.8 million in terms of rates, or close to 2.9. With the valuation change, that will actually reduce by almost just over $1 million. So that valuation change for them alone has been the significant driver in terms of that reduction in rates increase. Then you look at some of the properties that are going to be increasing by a significant amount. So there's 20 business properties that are planned to increase by more than 50%. For the 7, for example, this 7 here, they had, the revaluation was due to significant change in the land value and capital value. But on the other side of things, so they had a massive valuation change, they've got a rates increase, but on the other side of things, their capital value relative to their land value, they must be a mostly land value business. And so therefore their share is reducing as part of the rates review. So the big winners in this are those properties that have low value buildings on their properties, and they haven't seen much in the way of property increases in terms of valuation increases. The big losers in terms of, paying more rates, are those that have had significant property value increases and have high capital value properties relative to their land value. That's where you're going to see the big change.
So, Jacinda, we've got, I'm thinking of Oxford Street and the number of earthquake prone buildings at the moment whose capital values are probably very low. And so, therefore, their rates are relatively low at this stage. Because, the other way around. Their land values are higher than their capital values for a lot of them. So, if we change the capital value for those ones, we're in fact giving them a huge advantage in terms of, are we?
From that perspective, what you're saying from a policy perspective is that you recognize that capital value has you want that to influence the way that you charge.
Okay.
And so what that would, yes, absolutely. What that would be doing is that would be reducing the impact of rates for those properties that have a lower capital value relative to land value.
Because I'd be interested to know for those businesses, when we did the rates decrease, there was a significant drop in some of the business rating numbers for, and I'd be curious to know what that was like in 2019, 2020 as compared to these new ones, because it would actually be quite interesting, knowing the impact that had personally to my rating numbers. I'd be curious as to see whether it's actually restoring those to where they were previously, because I think there might be, a good riposte, if you like, in terms of people understanding that their rates have gone up a lot.
That's fine. Yep, I'll have a go. I think we'll have a go at pulling the last couple of years in.
Yeah.
Yep. So then as well, if we have a look at what's going on in the rural farming area, you can see there's 76 properties, and this doesn't have all the properties on it, just to say this is just the significant changes. But there are 76 properties that will have an increase of more than 50%. So for those properties, though, so the increase is going to be 271,000. The majority of that increase for these properties is coming in the revaluation change rather than in the change in terms of the policy change. And that's what I think is really important, is sometimes you can mix them all together and say that the increase is due to a change in terms of policy. But in some instances in this area, there are significant changes that are due to the revaluation as well, because certain areas are increasing at faster rates than others. There are a significant amount of properties in this area, for example, 173, where you've got between 25 and 50% higher in terms of rates. If we just look at, and is a sizable amount, sort of, you'd say almost a half of that, pretty much a half of it, or just over half, is due to the change in terms of to capital value from land value. So if we look at an example about why that's the case, there's 87 properties within here that have had a significant increase in the share of capital value for general rates to the previous land value. So that means those properties have proportionately a bigger share of capital value than they would have had land value previously. Does anyone have any? What I'm going to do now is just quickly, I know it's a ridiculously small sheet, But this is what you'll see in your portal when you go and look. So for each, I've given you one tab where you can see the rural farming specifically, or the main analysis sheet has also got everything in there and you can select rural farming. So when you do that, what I've selected here are some properties that have significant increases in their rates. And we'll just talk through why they have significant increases in their rates. So for these ones, if you look at this change in the land value and the change in the capital value that's been experienced over the last 3 years is very large. 500, 700, 800% increase in terms of the value of their properties. So that is a significant driver in terms of why they're experiencing the increase that they are. It's because of the increase in the value of both their land value and their capital value that's driving their rates up, because they have a bigger share of the pie effectively than they have previously. In terms of, so that proportionate change, but actually the rates review actually helps them out a little bit in terms of rebalancing that. So while it looks terrible from an overall increases when you look at it, when you break it down into what the individual components of it are, you can peel back those layers and see that the story is a little bit different. It's really because of that change in terms of their property value. If we look at residential, there are 115 properties that will see a decrease of between 25 and 50% on what they're currently paying. And in terms of what's driving that, that's significantly driven by the option to move from capital value, so from land value to capital value. That's because those properties, on average, have had lower increases, and they will have lower value properties relative to other ones in the district from a capital value perspective.
Just I don't know if you can answer this, but are those properties spread throughout the district, or are they pretty much in one place?
It's a good question. I'm not sure actually, but if you were to filter on that in there, you'd see it pretty quick where they sit. It's a little bit offset where you think that would increase, that would occur, because the likes of Shannon and some areas of Foxton have had significant value increases in some areas as well. So where you think if you had no valuation change and you just shifted to capital value, you would have expected some of those areas to reduce by more, but in some instances that land value to capital value changes actually help to balance that valuation increase. And in terms of large increases, just to quickly highlight, there are 71 properties in the district that will see an increase of greater than between 25 and 50%, and 22 that will see an increase of greater than 50%. And we talk about why. So a large section of it relates to the fact that there's a significant increase in the share of capital value for general rates to the previous land value. So that's where you'll have a significantly large house with a fairly sizable value to it that now is factored into the conversation in terms of rating that previously wasn't. And you can see with those properties, the significant driver for that increase is around that change from land value to capital value. Then again, so the rural other, you're absolutely right in this area. There's going to be some significant changes, and it's one to pay attention to and have a look at. There's 694 properties that would see an increase of between 25 and 50%. What's driving that change? is probably equally shared between the shift from shift to capital value and the rates increase as well, because they also probably aren't connected from a water and wastewater perspective. So what I've done today is I've given you a lot of detail, but I think it's important that you go and spend some time going through it. And what I wanted to finish with is from a policy, what I've heard is that you're happy to move to a capital value base rather than a land value base. So to progress with a conversation about it. So in terms of a conversation then, in terms of preparing the consultation document, in terms of getting a steer from you today, at this stage I'm happy to go with different options because we have them all there. But at this stage, we'd have a status quo option, which needs to include the valuation change. Another option, which it considers the change from land value to capital value. At this stage, I was suggesting to you that you also include an option in terms of some form of a differential. But I think it's probably a good time to stop and just see where you sit in terms of your thinking, and if you've got other suggestions in terms of what you might want to see or different considerations you might want to see reflected in the consultation document.
Can you just remind me the differential on option 3? Is that just on the roading, or is that on across? Yeah.
Thanks. That's just on the general rate. So for every dollar of general rate that the rest of the district pays, that rural farming area would pay 80 cents.
And the 80%, just can you talk us through why that figure has been sort of selected as a starting point in terms of that option?
Sure. It was looking at some of the significant increases for some of those rural properties and going, will the table see that that's fair to do all in one go? Or is it reasonable to bring it back a little bit in terms of that impact? So there wasn't not going to pretend there was no massive science to the 80%, but it was to reflect some sort of a logic around bringing that back from full 100.
In reality, Jacinda, what difference would that make? Just looking at the figures there, it seems like it's only a very slight massage. What would it really actually make a difference in terms of being helpful for consultation?
It's not a significant change. Equally, you could very likely go out with the consultation to go status quo or option 1, but also seeking feedback on the targeted rate option. Or equally, you could go out with the targeted rate option as well, but my thinking is that might be a little bit too much at this stage.
Jacinta, I'm struggling a little bit with this in terms of just trying to understand answering that question around equity and seeing the outcome of how these changes actually answer that question around, are we achieving a fair and equitable distribution, I guess almost down to unit number. I think that you had maybe last week had some slides that showed that distribution of these impact of these changes by way of properties that might be useful in giving a guidance around, are we achieving that equitable outcome that we're hoping to deliver?
So we've got so I'll load the graphs as well to give you that view. Another suggestion in terms of when you're looking at things within, if you determine that equity there's a couple of different versions of equity, I think, from different perspectives. Some views are that equity is everybody paying the same, so a fixed charge regardless of value of property. There's other views that equity is basing it on land value and then basing it on capital value, which some deem as a proxy for wealth, some deem that that's not the right way to do it. If from the third perspective, within the file, there is also, within the different SA1 and SA2 areas, I've included the median household income for the individual properties area unit that they sit in. So my best suggestion would be is to filter on those incomes, median household incomes, which are lower than, say, $50,000, and see what the impact of the proposed changes has on those individual properties within those areas. I'll absolutely load those graphs because they're done for you in there today. But that's another way that you can get that sense of, am I achieving what you might want to achieve from that perspective? Does that help in terms of your question there?
Do you want to go back to that slide that you started with, Jacinta, that showed the three options around status quo? Yeah. And so I think what we're trying to get a steer from the table on is, does this feel about right? Acknowledging that there are those additional questions that Rogan had helped create last week that we're going to capture in the consultation document too. So we're going to ask the other questions, but this is about the options we'll consult on.
Look, just to kick things off, I am comfortable with those. It's important for me that we start from a principled basis, as you highlighted before, Jacinta, which is, if we believe in principle that rating should be on the full picture, not on the part picture, in other words, capital, the whole story, not the part story. If that's principle number one, then that's something to advocate as a recommendation on a principled basis. However, it's absolutely essential that the status quo remain there as an option, because it's something people understand and are used to working with. The differential thing for me on reflection is important too, because again, it's about a principle which says that a segment of the population can be disadvantaged because of the rating system. Just because of the rating system, they can be disadvantaged, and it was clearly the case under land value for the rural sector, which is why the differential was there. And in the transition, where we've seen some huge movements, some significant increases for the rural population, it seems to me that it's important that we message that there is the opportunity for a differential to sort of massage that picture a bit. Albeit in reality, I've got to say, it's not going to make a lot of difference, I don't think, but it just puts out that principle of differential, saying we acknowledge that a segment of the population is disadvantaged under any rating system, really. So for those reasons, I do support those three options. Sorry, just to add, I was keen initially on including your representation democracy in the picture. And I think, just to be fair to Piri, I think she, in her feedback, said she wanted that included also, but I just don't want to overcomplicate it at this stage. So for that reason, I no longer support that. I'd agree, David. This really is about, for me, pretty much trying to understand the community's views now on whether they should have capital rating or land value rating, and to the intricacies of that. You can go 100 different things and put all sorts of different connotations around that and change, bits and pieces. But the proposition around whether land value or capital value rating is the most equitable and fairer rating system is the discussion that I principally would like the community to have, and I know that we know that it'll come from the farming community, that they will be up in arms regardless of what we do, but for the rest of the community, I think it's principally about understanding whether they support that or not. And we've talked about rates affordability a lot over the last 3 or 4 years. Was the principle about why we did a minus 1.83 rates increase, because at the time we thought that was the best way of making a change to suit what was happening at the time under the economic conditions. And this might be the same discussion.
Just to highlight one item in terms of your question, Councillor Grimstone, as well as just having a quick look at all properties that have a SA1 60,000, where the median household income of that area is less than $60,000. There would be 4,000 properties that would see a decrease in the rates as a result of that policy change. So just to give you an idea of where that sits.
So there's just on the Councillor Allen talked about option 3. If a differential was introduced for those reasons outlined, what overall effect would that have of what their overall intent is to change the capital value? Would it make a huge amount of difference across all those properties that will? Yeah, if we're talking about the main reason for capital value, obviously is equity and fairness, and blah blah blah. What sort of impact would that have on?
So that would have the impact at a high level of a reduction in terms of overall rates that the rural farming sector would pay by about 200,000, and then would see that shifted to the residential sector mostly. Because it's it's not going to be as significant, but it is still a change. Yeah, yeah.
Because I guess Paul will have a lot more knowledge across this than myself, but the farming community are already impacted with emissions fees, upcoming changes, government policy, central government policy, obviously. So I'm sure that will be an impact that they'll be keen to discuss with us during this period. So I guess for that reason, I'm open to including that as well into the options. But the recommendation is option 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, the recommendation at this stage, my recommendation to you is to consider is around that option 2 is moving the full change at this stage.
So in that case, would that still give us the opportunity to have that conversation with the rural? It needs to be highlighted. One objection needs to be highlighted somewhere, I guess, whether it's a formal option or.
So absolutely, it could be. I think if it's an option, then it's a consideration, and then when you've had the time to go through the individual types of, once you start to look at the different properties, where they sit and who's changing, and make sense of it because I think it's not till you actually get in and look at it, then different parts of the community will absolutely have their view, but you'll also have your view in terms of what you think's fair, and then it would give that opportunity as part of the finalised after consultation to make that change because you've made it a suggestion.
Yeah, so for me, I'm comfortable with option 2, but I'm certainly happy once we go through that process to perhaps include another option if we think that's the feeling of the table.
I have my 2 cents with. I think like the 3 options I support because it does give you that flexibility, but I probably don't obviously support recommendation 2, just from going through some of these things, and obviously I'm probably quite attached to or close to some of these businesses, so I realise and probably appreciate the significant impact they'll have on their bottom line. So.
Just maybe a question to Paul, if that's in order. We're talking about option 3, the 80% differential. Would it be helpful to examine that percentage of differential, maybe some other option in terms of where the differential is set, rather as the third option? Would that be helpful for the discussion?
Yeah, I think so. I just need to have a bit more look at, I suppose, because at the moment it's probably not a massive difference, but as far as, it does look like it is being accommodated to an extent, I think, with that 80%. But yeah, it'd be interesting just to have a play with it.
I wonder if Jacinta might just want to provide some analysis on that. I know that she did some analysis of, like, if that was lower than 80% or higher than 80%, sorry, is what I mean. What that did to, as I understand it, it kind of got it to a position where the rates increase for the rural part of our community would be less than what it had been if we would just leave it to the revaluation. So it kind of created an unintended consequence of almost not bothering. Is that fair, Jacinta?
Yeah, I think, you can see the shift from option 2 to option 3. So that 80%, the shift from 100% to 80% is shifting almost 500,000 from the rural sector into the residential sector. So if you went, say, another 20%, then you get about $1 million that would shift. So that's why sort of that 80 was somewhere that would reflect that signal without.
I think 80 is probably, everyone's got to be paying their share. I think that just at least 80, it does show some sort of so but I'm more than
Do we have any idea about yet in terms of the pricing or rating methodology that the Three Waters entity is likely to use? Because in reality, that aren't these setting the rates beyond just this first year? I mean, is this all for just, is this potentially just a waste of time in terms of, that honestly, that's where I'm sitting, is that initially, I support the 3 options in terms of consulting on them, but initially I was really keen to at least have the conversation about the capital value, land value to capital value. But where I'm sitting right now, I'm not in favour of that recommendation. For me, it's option 1, status quo, because there's some key things that are happening. Three Waters, we don't know what's happening and how that cost of those services are going to be charged to our community. Second is the future of local government. We don't know, I don't think yet, around what the recommendations in that context are likely to be in terms of how the cost of local government should be allocated and distributed and shared across our community. So for me, it feels like we're almost picking a scab and having an unnecessary conversation ahead of some pretty big things. So that's where I sit. As I say, I was initially really, really keen to at least have the conversation, and we'll still get some conversation around land value, capital value. But for me, I think I'd have a preference for option 1 at this point.
Just reminding, for example, we picked those 60,000 properties list, they would see $300,000 more would be shared to those properties than is currently shared, with no change in policy, and that's just because of the revaluation increase. So that's the other bit that you've got to consider as well, is if you make no change, there's still a big change to some.
Yeah, and so my only response to that is that over the last however many years we've had this rating system, there's been winners and losers at every single revaluation. And so, there is also an equity argument that comes into that, is that, yes, some people have done pretty well out of valuation increases over time, but comes with that is a burden in terms of your rate share. Obviously, there's a piece where if that rating valuation changes, burdening a lower economic some households that have a really low economic base, then obviously that is a concern. But I don't know if it means that we need to necessarily change the whole approach to rating. Perhaps it's about more dealing with those individual households, or coming up with some sort of option to deal with those individual households.
Councillor Jennings, I hear your perspective about your concern around Three Waters reform and future for local government. I think it's going to be some time before we have any certainty around future for local government. But just around the Three Waters stuff, if I could just, the table needs to give us guidance on the basis of the principled policy decision for that rating type. So Three Waters is a targeted rate. It is like that. You've kind of almost got to take Three Waters out of the picture because doesn't form currently part of the general rate. I understand what I think I'm hearing your concern, Councillor Jennings, around how it changes the bigger context. But when we think about our obligations under the Rating Act to decide who benefit, the exacerbator, all of that stuff, this topic has only been about the general rate. It's not been about the targeted Three Waters rates.
I think it's really important that really everyone at this table does state a position on this, and I do feel the need to push back on Councillor Sam's logic, because this review is driven by a sense of trying to be fairer in the way that we rate people. We're deeply aware, as a result of the analysis done by Jacinta and her team, that there is a sizable percentage of our population for whom rates represent up to and including 10% of their income. That's a reality. Among the figures that we were given today is that under the revised model, where we shift from land value to capital value, there are 4,000 properties in our district where the income is under $60,000 who will receive a rates decrease as a result of this. So if we bring those stats alongside the principle of trying to be fair and also accepting we don't know what we don't know about the future of local government, Three Waters, etc., then we must press on. And I think we must press on with a rates review that says the fairest model, our preferred model at this stage, unless the public can tell us we're wrong, is a shift from land value to capital value.
Well, I didn't know we were having the debate in council meeting today, but apparently we are. So I think you're right that everyone at the table needs to express a view, but I think it needs to be about their preference rather than attacking the merits or others, because it's not debate. It's not debate. So if I knew that let's have a debate. Yeah.
Well, could we be clear? I understand we're asked to give a steer as to our preferred option. In order to give a steer as to our preferred option, don't we have to give reasons?
Yeah.
And then, of course, it goes through the consultation process. So that's not predetermination.
But let's not have that debate now. There will be plenty of opportunity for that debate to happen when we consult, after we consult. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and also just reminding council that when we bring the draft long-term plan for adoption is when councillors will debate and make a decision. The reason we're needing a steer is because before we bring the draft long-term plan for adoption, we have to go through the audit process, and the audit process needs to at least hopefully reflect where elected members are at.
So just to help stimulate the conversation, I'm going to go back. I certainly support acknowledging some of Sam's comments and also Councillor Allen. But happy to have the conversation with the community. I think we need to. This has been around a long time, and it's got to go there. I'll certainly be reserving the right to see what they tell us, because I think they'll tell us clearly. And whenever there's winners, there's a lot of people going to benefit, but there are losers. And one of the concerns, and I'll save that because that's getting into too deep, but I'll save that for another day. But yeah, happy to have the conversation, really open to what recommendations or options we go with. Sounds like there's 3 fair options on the table, and I'm happy to go and have the conversation with the community.
Jacinda, in terms of what other councils are doing, I know you've said at some stage that there has been some changes from land value, capital value from a few councils. Do you have an idea of some that we could, get in? It'd be interesting to know the impacts that some have had in terms of that and what consequences they've seen from changing.
Sure, I can have some chats and then bring back some information as part of the next stage. Yeah. Does anyone else want to offer any specific views that might be different to what we've talked about today?
So if we bring a draft consultation document to the 15th of March council meeting, alongside all the supporting documentation, do you as elected members feel like A, you've got sufficient information, but B, you're in a position to debate and adopt a draft long-term plan around the rates review?
My answer to that would be yes, provided we do some homework. My steer would be I'm happy with the 3 options. I'm happy with the recommendation being LV to CB to allow the community to have its say and to have a rigorous debate around what we do end up doing. I'm nearing an adverse reaction to the 80% differential for farmers from an equitable perspective, but I'm happy to have a look at the smoothing to understand the impacts of how that delivers when we get in under the number. And look, the only reason really for that is when you look at expenses, and farmers can quite largely claim a hell of a lot of expense write-off against their incomes that the average person earning less than $60,000 in our community doesn't have the ability to write off. So while I appreciate that there may be a bigger ask on those that happen to be in that farming rural community, I think it's important to understand there are some benefits outside of a rating review from an equity perspective. That's just my thought.
Kia ora. I just wanted to thank everyone for their comments too and just gathering my own thoughts, but I think Councillor Grimstone actually summed it up really well for me, so my opinion is pretty much the same. Kia ora.
Can I urge everybody, if they're not comfortable in terms of what the Chief Executive has just asked, that between now and March the 15th, that they do seek some answers or conversations that will enable them to be confident in making those decisions on March the 15th. As we have a month just over, so plenty of time to do some thinking and some research and understanding of the issue. And if you're not quite sure, please ask.
More than happy to sit with you and go through the analysis, or any questions you have, please ask it. Okay, the next stage is to firstly have a look at the development contributions again. These large numbers are largely similar to what you've seen before, with the exception of the team have done some more work looking through some of the assumptions in terms of proportion of projects related to growth. So in the Waitarere and Taraiki areas, there are some small decreases in terms of the levies that have been proposed in these areas. One thing to note, and Monique mentioned this earlier, is around development contributions. With the legislative change and the potential issues around that we're facing around that, you need to set a long-term plan and have a revised long-term plan to be able to amend a development contributions policy. So this item is a little bit stuck in the process in terms of making sure that we can see this through well. But the key highlight in terms of based on the capital projects and what's being proposed as part of this plan, the significant changes as part of this process are in the areas of Tokomaru and also Oho. Oho, just highlighting again that key reason for that change is around both the infrastructure that's needed for water, but also reflecting the fact that to allow Oho to be connected to water, you also need the Levin network in terms of the treatment facilities and the reticulation network to allow that water to get to Oho. So previously in the policy, that area did not include that cost. So effectively it needs to make sure it's including the Levin cost as well. So that is the key reason for that change. In Tokomaru, that's around the wastewater treatment plant and the cost of that. One thing we've talked about is those areas like Oho or Tokomaru where you might not have the actual access to that treatment. So for example, in Oho where you might not be able to connect until later on, there are facilities within the policy that you could pay. For example, you'd be assessed on water, but you might not pay for that particular water charge until you get to that connection stage where you're actually able to connect and use that water network. So just to highlight that in terms of the policy. Does anyone have?
Yeah, sorry. So just on that, Oha is a good example where there's already some trickle feed supplied to some areas of that community. So would that feed trigger at that connection to the current trickle feed, or would it be once there's full reticulation?
Yeah, there'll be a process through the development engineering stage and assessment of a consent, whereby the policy in terms of a remission around the connectivity could be looked at. So it would probably need to be done on a case by case basis, but there is a wider consideration around where that currently sits in the long term plan in terms of the outer years around 29 through to 32. That we may need to come back as the interest sparks in the area to do further work than the previous report that was done in 2019, which is effectively a concept. So there's going to be a case where we're signalling that if it was serviced, there'd be a cost for that. But if there's interim development before that work was commissioned, there'd be a process to work through it. So it sounds a little bit complex, but it's just a staging thing where the service isn't there currently and available.
Jacinta, there's outside those two areas, there's two other significant changes being Foxton and Shannon Mangori. Can we outline what the drivers of those are, please?
I'm assuming, and I'll let Daniel jump in, that those are due to the increased investment in that area in terms of costs for water and wastewater.
Divided by the level of growth we're anticipating versus Levin, where obviously the change is less. If you look at our long-term plan amendment, we're anticipating quite a significant more investment in Levin, but it's when you apply the growth lens across that.
So in terms of this policy, we're still progressing. So in terms of that policy change, it's not expected that there are other changes to the policy other than updating the costs to reflect what's being reflected in the long-term plan amendment in terms of capital project changes. But we need to wait and make sure from a legislative perspective that we're happy with this to progress it to that next stage.
I think picking up on Councillor Jennings' earlier question around Oho, in terms of, well, it's going to be some time until they get there. And then also picking up on Councillor Tukapua's earlier email around the Waitanere reticulation, where, like, again, it's going to be some time until they get that, and we're kind of not in a position in this long-term plan to take those off the table, even though there might be some time away. I'm wondering whether there's some particular language we need to make sure the policy reflects, but also our consultation document reflects about, well, what does this actually mean if I'm doing development in those areas, but you can't promise me water reticulation until year 29?
The question then needs to be asked, why are we putting them in a wall?
Because our long-term plan says that we're going to. And this is what's so challenging around a development contributions policy, is it's like forward-looking, back-looking, current-looking.
Because then, just touching base, obviously we had the conversation earlier, Monique, probably, around, like, we've got to treat things as Three Waters is going to happen. So then most of these big infrastructure expense, or costs, won't exist anyway. We've still got to talk on them.
Correct. And so, in theory, from 1 July 24, the only development contribution that we will legally be able to charge is the land transport one and the community infrastructure one. And which is, like, the big cost is obviously driven particularly in wastewater.
Can you just explain that a little bit more for me, Connie, please?
So from 1 July 2024, it will be, based on the current legislation, it will be illegal for us to rate or put a fee or service in place for Three Waters activities. And so, like, we're a little bit unsure about where the development contribution stuff is going to land with Three Waters reform. But in theory, from 1 July 24, we will not be able to charge a development contribution for stormwater, water supply, or wastewater. That will be the role of Entity C as the new water entity, albeit they don't have powers yet to do development contributions. They'll have a different mechanism, a little bit like utility power companies do. We will only be able to charge a land transport development contribution and a community infrastructure development contribution. But when we come to do our long-term plan proper next year, end of this year, we will have to review our development contributions policy again, with the knowledge that we're hoping we'll know more about Three Waters reform.
So, Monique, has there been any discussion around, we're going to spend $25 million at Taurika of our own money, and we've already started spending quite a bit of that, and the law's going to change that we can't charge development contributions, yet we've already spent that money. How is it retrospective? The debt transfers as well?
Yeah, because
But that's a government, we've got CIP loan funding for half of that at 0%, which we've got to pay back.
that is an example of the sorts of things that the National Transition Unit need to work through.
Yeah, okay.
But the contract should transfer over to the new water entity. So the loan repayments
should come back to us.
The loan repayments shouldn't be ours. The loan repayments should be the water entities.
Yeah, just for clarity, a third of that Taurika value is actually grant, and the agreement with CIP is that there's a pro rata basis where we spend 2/3 grant versus 1/3 council loan fund, which is going through our Three Waters process. And it wouldn't be until that project effectively gets to that 2/3 stage, which is sometime in that 12 to 18 month period, so basically into next year, where we would come at a whole point to give an update to elected members before drawing down on the second agreement, which is that interest-free loan. And so that would be a decision point when we'd have clarity as to how that would be handed across to the Crown, or any responsibility before we would commit to that.
Just confirming they're here in March to have negotiations around debt transfer with us.
Just a couple of questions from me. I noted Councillor Tukupa's email about a survey that was put out to the Waterbury residents around the reticulation. Have we done the same thing in Oho? Because I'm just interested to know what that looks like, or if there's even a request by the community to have that linkage made. And then I'm thinking long term, the cost to do the connection and maintain as opposed to incentivising people to be more self-sustainable and developers to be more self-sustainable. Those are just my first couple of comments. And I find it quite funny that Oho costs go through the roof when the treatment plant's already down there in Oho. So that sort of, opens my eyes a little bit and makes me understand that a lot of our whānau are going to be impacted, not just the wider residents, but my own family and my own landowners will be highly impacted by what we're talking about here. Just further comment is, and I will say it, Taraika, I see it on there. Is there as an example, or is this another town we have?
In terms of the policy, you're required to, where you can, treat things in a catchment area. So because that investment, the specific investment could be ring-fenced to that area, then it was deemed reasonable to just charge those costs to those houses that are being developed in that area. So that's why it's its own. So it still pays for the district-wide costs, but the specific investment that's been occurred for growth in Taraika was determined should be recovered from just those properties rather than the rest of the district.
I don't mind seeing it there as a comparison, but I don't like seeing it there as another place. Otherwise, I'd ask for Waitari to put a Tawhafo, Kupura, and a whole lot of other places to be added to your chart. But I think for knowledge, it's good to have a comparison to see how the rest of Levin pay as opposed to the new development. So that's just my first point. And the other one is, I've heard some incredible figures today around Taraika, and we're all quite aware of them. I'm, for the life of me, I still don't understand the huge commitment council have given to the private development and the funding that potentially could have come into the district to support a whole lot of other needs. So I'm just making that as a statement, nothing more. But I do find it incredible the resourcing that is expected to go into this and the cost to the district to appease a development, that I don't see this type of thing occur anywhere else. So I'm just making those statements so people are quite aware of my thinking. Kia ora.
Okay, does anyone else have any other questions or comments around development contributions before we move on to fees and charges?
Got a real boring one, maybe a Daniel one. In the policy itself, 3.6.1.1b, so you can get a remission or reduction if the applicant has provided or funded the same infrastructure that the development contribution is being paid for. If somebody wants to install their own water and septic in a suitable area, can they not pay their development contribution through that clause?
I believe so, but we'll have to come back to you and confirm. They would still, if they're in an area that's reticulated, they'd still, from a rating perspective, pay 50% of the rates. But I believe from a development contributions perspective, if they don't have a connection, then they wouldn't need to. But we'll confirm.
So if they're not triggering the unit of demand, then yes. But the only way they can't trigger the unit of demand is if their consent would allow them to do the on-site wastewater and drinking water, which obviously will be limited in some parts of the district.
Cool. Yeah, that answers that. So, Jacinta, sorry, just back to Monique's comment before about the language then that's used inside this policy, because there are some certain projects and I think maybe Oho and Tokumara are good examples where a project hasn't yet started to enable you to have the capacity to connect to, and so is there any way to treat those types of projects differently to obviously where a lot of these other costs here are ultimately there's a growth portion to a broader renewal or capacity increase sort of project, whereas so Oho and probably Tokumara are good examples where actually the cost associated with these things is only going to be at the point of connection, and if that point of connection is 10 years away, why are we increasing the numbers now and potentially this is how I view it, potentially scaring people off developing in the interim because they're not actually having to pay that full cost, because you're saying that part of it might be deferred until the point at which they can actually connect. Because I'm thinking that take somebody who wants to develop in Tokumaru or Oho, they look at that number, they look at their earthquake, the liquefaction assessment, they look at all the other consent fees. There's already an eye-watering sum in order to actually bring a section to a market, or if you're wanting to build your own home and subdivide, that's a massive number that you're looking at. So my preference would be to have that more reflecting more like reality right now, acknowledging that those people aren't going to escape those charges. They're just not going to be charged them until that capacity and ability to connect is actually there.
Yeah, I think it's about the language and how we reflect it in the policy. I think we need, from a legal perspective, I understand we need to assess it, assuming it's the full, at the point of them applying, assess the fact that they're going to need to pay. But from what you're saying, we can absolutely choose to not bill them for that portion of it until they connect later on. But in terms of the messaging and how it gets reflected in the policy so that that's clear for people, I absolutely hear what you're saying. So we'll have a think about how we can represent it in that way so that it isn't scaring people in terms of when they're going to have to pay cash out the door. Okay, I'll invite Vi to the table now, who's going to work through hopefully what is our final wrap-ups around fees and charges. So while Vi was on leave, I worked through with you the changes and potential changes around the dog and animal control. We talked around moving between going with 80 to 90% in terms of a private fee. There was some conversation around that range, and we discussed the fact that would require to move to effectively being compliant up to 80%, even though our range is 80 to 90, that would require a fee increase of 18% based on last year. So Vi's kindly prepared that information for you and is going to work through not only that, but also some of the conversation around environmental and health. Some of the information I provided you with last week around environmental, I didn't have that understanding quite right. So Vi is going to clarify that and work you through that last bit.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ngā mihi o te ahi. So, having a look at, going backwards, the dog and animal control fees and charges. So the increase in dog registrations by 18%, that's doable. I mean, anything that we're going out for consultation is doable. It's about what it looks like and what the impact is on the dog owner. So what I've done is actually presented it to you and what it looks like in a dollar value for each one of the registration fees. The percentage seems like a lot, but when you look at the variance and you balance it out, the $12 variance is $1 a month for that particular dog. And so this is at the point where we're going out to the community and saying, this is what we want, this is what we want, this is what it looks like. It wouldn't be inconsistent with fees charged by some of our neighbouring TAs either. Admittedly, not the rural TAs, but that said, not inconsistent. And certainly would still meet the requirements of the Dog Control Act in terms of the costs are there, we're trying to recover the costs, so it's not as if we're being unreasonable here in terms of the cost recovery. So this is what it looks like. In essence, the steer I'm looking for is, this is what we want, I'm comfortable with that, and these are what the fees look like. So thank you for your input last week, albeit in my absence. And in terms of health licensing policy, this one's a little bit more tricky, and I've done some analysis around what the fees would need to look like in order for us to move up to meeting the current policy, as well as underneath that, looking at the amount of time that the staff who currently carry out those functions spend realistically in the food licensing and health licensing space, and how much of that we could actually reasonably recover as part of the fees. Across that, I've also looked at being consistent for both the Food Act fees and the Health Act fees in terms of how we are charging that, so that we can be transparent to the community about what we are recovering back and how we've arrived at that fee. It's not just lick our finger and decide on an amount that we think is reasonable. We've actually worked it out, and you'll see there's a rationale column there. I've worked that out based on the hourly fee that we are saying at the bottom and how much time we actually realistically spend on each one of these businesses by that hourly fee. You will see that for the Health Act fees and charges, the increase and the proposed increase for that, the variance is quite significant. It's overall around about 240% increase across all of those businesses. Again, it doesn't put us out of step with some of our other neighbouring councils. It does put us at the higher end of those councils, but that said, it does reflect if we think that our staff are worth this amount of money at an hourly rate, this is reflective of how many hours they actually spend on each one of these businesses. So at the top there, you'll see for a majority of them, it's around about 2.5 hours. For some of the more complex and a bit more specialist fields, such as funeral directors and camping grounds, it takes us a little bit more time because there's more to look at, essentially, for the inspector. We're looking at the Food Act fees and charges, again, being consistent, looking at how much time we accurately spend on each one of these businesses and then working out, based on the hourly rate, how much that would cost. And so those fees, although, yes, there's still about a 200% increase there, doubled, the amount is still consistent with what we would then be charging for the Health Act fees. On the right-hand side, the column, I've actually just put the number of businesses that are in there as well, so that we can see across the district how many businesses or people's livelihoods this impacts, I guess. And so we're not talking about a heck of a lot of businesses in this space either. We're talking about 29 hairdressers, which is the largest percentage of Health Act licensees that we have in our district. And then 4 funeral directors, or you can read the numbers down there. For the Food Act fees, you'll see I've put the number of businesses in there as well. The numbers that are in here, or the values in order to make those percentages I talked about before, 70% of the health licenses recovered in fees and charges. There are some assumptions built into that, and those assumptions are around the number of verifications we will carry out in the 12-month period. And the reason why I bring that up is because the Food Act sets the frequency of how often we do verifications. It's not on a 12-monthly basis. There are food businesses that are verified in every 18 months. that goes over a financial year, and we can't count all of those businesses in here as people that will be paying fees this year. And so there is around about 88 food businesses so far that we know will be verified or are scheduled to be verified in the next 12 months, so that builds that assumption in there. We also, on average, have about 3 businesses a month that are new registrations that come in, so we've built that assumption in there as well. So based on those, that's how we've arrived at that percentage. So the other thing to mention around Food Act fees, getting the steer today, or when we receive the steer around these fees, they still need to be set through the public or the special consultative process. So the Food Act says in order for a council to set fees for the Food Act, we need to go through the Local Government Act special consultative procedure. So we can agree on this, but we still need to then go out and publicly consult on that through the SCP, and I'm not sure whether we can do that through the ADP process. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Yeah, that's it, really. Any other questions?
So just the clarification that we can do it, tag it on to the long-term plan amendment. Yeah, we don't need a separate process. No, thank you.
And that's that bit where in the past we haven't necessarily brought all the fees through the process, but we're going to include them all as part of this process so that it's attached to the supporting information. The only difference will be at the end of the process. Some of those legislative ones might get approved a little bit earlier than the final long-term plan document.
So sorry, can I just, so the first lot sort of probably brings in an extra $5,000-ish worth of revenue. It's only about $5,000 away from the general rate that's now going to be collected by fees, and in the Food Act fees it's around about $35,000. So does that actually have any material impact on the percentage splits in terms of the total cost of the activity? Because you're capped, aren't you, as well, in terms of what you can charge?
What it will bring it back to is around about 30% recovery across the entire activity. That said, we've also done some analysis around how much time is accurately spent by the environmental health officers and the food safety officer across the costs for the compliance activity. So essentially the environmental health activity includes majority of the compliance activities. Not all of those activities relate to environmental health. Only about 25-26% of that is actually environmental health. And so the costs associated with that then obviously come down, and when we're looking at what we recover in fees and charges, we're recovering around about 60% of the costs of the overall compliance activity in fees and charges for health.
Okay, I think that wraps up the revenue and financing policy and fees and charges side of things, so thank you.
Thank you. And then we come back to the landfill. It was a really good discussion last week and agreement on the options. Would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, so the options that we come with last week, just running through, effectively option 1 was closure of the live-in landfill with no alternative use, but we did want to clarify that option still would require general ongoing maintenance and effectively a status quo usage around maintenance and re-establishment of the forestry. Option 2 was around the closure of live-in landfill, but for us to take the time, leaving the door open to investigate further opportunity for future use around the site, and depending on that final option would be a subsequent decision of council, depending on the level of requirement to consent a further activity, and there would be significant engagement ongoing with NLG and PMG around any future decision in that aspect. And then option 3 was to reopen the landfill and operate the consent until consent expiry in 2037. So the recommendation that was brought by the technical team and council officers was to put forward option 2, and that would be modelled in the LTP and put forward. There seemed to be a general consensus around the table last week to move forward with that option, and so really today was just a check-in to ensure that we were still comfortable with that, knowing that final decision wouldn't be made till the 15th of March post-audit process. Nods and thumbs up around the table. Great, thanks, team.
Great.
Could we just check that there were no further questions around the draft detailed business case which you received last week, acknowledging you got a final copy last night? I just, keen to make sure that if there's any issues that need to be teased out, we know about it.
Nothing, no issues. Just I think had a pretty good look through it. Just really happy that it captured a lot of things we talked about. But yeah, some things might be a little bit less comfortable about, and some of the suggestions that were made seems to have captured a lot of that stuff really well. So I was really pleased to get through it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments. Thank you for the work you guys have done. I like the options. I don't like the bit in brackets in option 2. I don't think it's required. One of the things I want to really impress on my fellow councillors is none of the options explore managing our own waste. And so, again, it's for comment. But while those 3 options might be talking about our current landfill situation, none of it leans towards the future of how this district manages its own waste. And if we're going to go to consultation in such a way, in such a manner, I think our public need the opportunity to actually engage an option around what waste looks like in the future in alignment with our own strategy here. Because I'm really concerned about us continuing this behaviour of shipping waste out. I know Bonnie Glen's only got a lifespan. I think they've got 12 million cube capacity left, from my understanding. And I also know there's other districts around the country right now that are grappling with the same situation with us, particularly Auckland, where there's no plan for after a landfill closes. And so I'm just going to say it again here. I believe we need to be exploring options with our community about how we are going to deal with waste within our own district. I don't think I need to say any more, but I'll keep saying it. Kia ora.
Yeah, so the comment in brackets is really to highlight that there is no other option other than to take waste out of the district. Through the process to develop the long-term plan proper 2024 in conjunction with the waste minimisation plan, the first step is really around how do we reduce that amount of rubbish and waste that's being produced. There would be an opportunity through that process to start looking more broadly around those other options if there was an appetite to start considering an in-district landfill, but that's certainly not on the table currently, and we wanted to make sure that we clearly communicated that with our community that there is no plans afoot, and anything around that would be certainly an extended time frame, and it would probably be the appropriate time to investigate that through the long-term plan proper process.
I think not to impress it next step, but now I'll keep planting the seed. I'll continually plant the seed because that's what people are coming back to saying. It's not good enough. We don't have a foolproof future plan for our waste, and they want us to work out how we reduce our waste to zero. And the only ones that can make that happen is us.
Just in response to that, as one of the councillors that's been around the table for a while, and particularly in the last term, one of the reasons this landfill matter still sits on the table in this new council was the concern in the previous business case and information we received from the previous council was a lack of consideration about exactly what just Councillor Timahana is talking about. And that is one of the reasons it's still sitting in front of us today, is because the previous council were very uncomfortable to make a decision without all those other things that you're alluding to, Councillor Timahana, with some commitment to those. And that I think Councillor Jennings and Mia Wanden and Councillor Allen will support that. And we've had a commitment from Mr. Hagan and the CE that, and we've heard it through these processes, that waste minimisation planning plan is the big follow-up from this, but we could not continue to sit on our hands with a landfill, waiting for those things to come about. And once again, I've said it before, and like you, and I'll say it again, is that there is simply no leadership nationally in this issue, and that is the problem. So yeah, it certainly was a big consideration in the previous council and a big driver for the reason that we still sit here debating future landfill today.
We've got to put the horse before the cart, and I'm sure that our consultation document is going to refer heavily that there's a waste management plan that needs to be done. And I think the wording is in reaction to our expressed desire to make sure that the community were well aware that our waste is currently going out of district and will continue to go out of district on the basis that if we choose option 1 or option 2, that is the choice before us, and that through a waste management minimisation plan revamp, potentially there may be a need to look at what next. So I'm happy with moving forward with what we've got in front of us right now, so that we can reach the point of the next stage of that conversation.
Just my 2 cents. Sorry, just my 2 cents. Like, I support what's being presented to us. I think, yeah, just on Justin's, I support that wider conversation as well. But and I think we do need to have that language through this process to actually highlight that we are actually, out of district. It's going to someone else's backyard. It's not, it's not getting taken to some glorious place or anything. So at the end of the day, people need to know the ins and outs sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it is important to understand that any of these options come at a cost to the ratepayer, and what this process has determined is that that gap is not as significant as previously perhaps expected with our community, and that any advance on disposal within district would be some time away, and we're not just talking months or years. That's a fairly significant consenting and financial commitment, and if we look at that on a national scale, there's not a lot of councils taking action in that space. So it's certainly something that could be explored and understood at a high level, but really those quick wins and a lot of that focus needs to really turn to how we reduce that waste, and that would be a key focus of that waste minimisation plan.
Sorry, just to change the subject, Caro. One of Councillor Tukapua's questions was around the cost that was mentioned as 1.6 million. And her inference is that that's what it takes to actually transport it to Bonnie Glen. And I don't think it's very clear, in fact, what that cost is made up of. Is it to transport?
It's effectively the bottom line with that comparative assessment across those options. So it's made up of fees, transport at Bonnie Glen, but then that's offset by the fact that there's a reduction in cost to manage the landfill. So it's that differential comparison that's being done. Yeah.
Daniel, sorry, down into the weeds a bit. It was just following on from a conversation I had with Alice last week about the reference to, or the language around local versus regional facilities. And so in the business case document, it still uses, I think, for resource recovery local and for processing for organic waste regional. And I just want to be really clear, because that's something that's really important to me in terms of that organic material processing, is that that is the thing that is most likely to be mandated on local government and that we will be required in future to deal with. And so it's really important for me that that's captured, that the potential use of the site as a local processing facility is captured and referenced in that business case, or if it's not viable at all, that needs to be ruled out, because that then has that sends us down a different pathway, in my opinion, because that then requires a different site. It requires capital investment in that, or for us to look at options again for out of district. So I don't know if Alice can, but for me that local v regional, it needs some massaging, or needs some discussion in the business case, or the language to keep it open so that we're not ruling out anything in terms of that future alternative use.
Yeah, so that final business case shared last night is still in draft format in terms of picking up feedback, so we can take that back to the wider team for consideration. The point to probably remember though is that that assessment was done at based on national level, what kind of works, what may work in our situation, knowing that any of those future options does need to have further work in terms of what are we generating, what size facility, are there other locations, which would need to be explored in parallel with any decision around that future use. So there's certainly a lot more work to do in that space, but we can pick up on that feedback and look at a response to either amend or come back to you on that.
Thank you.
Right. And so then we move into discussion of the draft consultation document itself. So you've had hopefully an opportunity to have a look through the material that's already in there. And before we step it through, just wanted to touch on the three themes that we have going through this. The lighting isn't showing that, but behind that slide there is the picture of all of you, and what the aim is that we want to really present this as the team effort that it has been, and that this is council speaking and having the discussion with the community. So less one. No, I wondered if maybe we could take another one that had everybody. That would be great. The second theme that we've had throughout this, throughout our workshops and all, is that we are being more open and transparent than we have in previous developments of long-term plans and annual plans. That as we're considering these big issues, there are some really tough issues to consider. So we're laying those out so that people can see the process that we've had to go through to work to what is being presented. And the third one is that feedback matters. Lisa will talk more about this in her part, but wanting to have a really broad range of ways that people can find information, can ask questions, have discussions, and to make it as easy as we can for people to be engaged. So us going out and being there to have conversations in person rather than people having to come in here in a range of ways and times for that to happen. And also for the landfill, that with the work that went into the earlier submissions, that if people's position and feedback hasn't changed, they're welcome to resend in the submissions they prepared earlier. Then I thought to get your feedback, that we could just step through the document section by section to raise any issues. We have Councillor Tukapua's feedback, which we'll take on board. So if we were to move into the introductory section with the council message, this is a draft. How we start off. And
it could include the big issues to resolve and the scene setting. Anything up until we head into water infrastructure, big issue 1. Did anybody have any comments?
Caro, I wonder whether it might be worth just referring to the pretty version, just in terms of the how you intend to use elected members during the document, because I think that might shape their feedback.
Thank you. And I was just wondering.
That's all right. Comms team has worked up a few pages to show you what it might look like when we've got the full version done. And so Lisa's just bringing up the slides in there. So what we're looking to do is have the information set out, have council introduce the document in the council's message, but then for the different sections, have images of councillors as part of that. Great. So we've got it. So these are the worked up pages, and for the section we have big issues to resolve. We're starting with this page, a short snippet about which gives an overview of the narrative, highlighting our 3 key issues, and then on the next page it explains the narrative that we've been discussing throughout, stepping through the key issues that council needs to resolve. And this is the message that we've discussed a few times. But looking also to use these images throughout the rest of the document so that it hangs on that. And then in the water section, we've got a real theme looking to the future hora whenua. So young people and coming through in our community. This is the type. And then here we have setting out the issues, and this on the right hand side, connecting in images of councillors as spokespeople for these issues. So interested. Welcome your feedback on this. We're also including messages that we've received from the community in previous consultations, in comments that come up to us. So this you said was one that came through the resident satisfaction survey. So aim is to show that we are listening, we hear people, and this is what we're proposing, so people can see what we're looking at.
So there's a copy of this on the if they want that.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks, Grayson. Grayson was just saying that there is a copy of these on your portal as well, if you'd like to have a closer look. Yeah. Great. Okay. So does that kind of help set the scene for the document? We're looking at making it light, easy to read, lots of pictures and images and graphs. So using the graphs that have come through in the different workshops as well to set the story out for the community as well. So you can see the effects. So with the rates review, the different graphs that we've had there. Good. Okay. If everybody's happy, should we move into the water section? Great. And how did that land in terms of the information that's presented? Are we touching on all of the right material? Does it sound right? Is anything missing?
Look, it looks good. I like the layout of it. The question I had was really around, and I know that status quo, like just keeping things as they are, is not really an option. So it's a Clayton's option, but doesn't need to be included because both of the other options include as a basic assumption the introduction of leak detectors / water meters, which also requires then a decision of this table to then allocate funding through the long-term plan because there's no current allocation. So there has to be at least an option there that doesn't include leak detectors, water meters, from my perspective, in order to enable the discussion, even if the option, as I say, is totally, we can outline the disadvantages of it and that it's basically not a viable option, but we have to present it as an option because that's my current issue is that option 1, option 2 both have water meters as leak detectors as key assumptions. So if you're wanting to submit on this and you don't agree with that, where do you go? You don't have, you can't, there's nothing for you to compare that to or be able to feedback on. So that's just the initial reaction.
That's a good point, and we can add that in. I think we've got some of that in the wording around it, but pull it into an option, and that would explain it. It would help with the second question that we're asking for feedback on, because that was something we were wondering, if we're asking, do you agree with water meters or leak detectors, but we're not presenting, both options include them, is that genuine consultation? So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just pausing, I don't want to rush through, but I don't want to miss anything. Okay, so then heading into the landfill section, got a couple of numbers as to add in, but would welcome your feedback on this. We have included, we wanted to highlight the connection to the waste management and minimisation plan. So we've got a box in here which refers to that because the question as it has here comes up, what about everything else? So I'd like to signal in there that people may be thinking as they go through this, where does our waste go and what are our other options? So we've connected that in and would welcome your feedback on all of that.
I could be wrong, but I don't think the landfill section's on the version that we've been sent, unless you've got it. But yeah, I think the email one stops at page 20 something. It's kind of got 51 pages. Screen 47 of 140. Tuesday, 4:37.
Cool. While those guys are finding it, I'll do my comments on the landfill section, which was in the kind of questions we'd like additional feedback on. I'd like to see something around option one, which is closed with no alternative use, like a how long kind of question on that. If people have opted for option one, is it closed with no alternative use forever? Is it 10 years? Like what kind of time frame are they imagining? Yeah, I know personally, like I'd be pretty interested in an option that was closed for a certain period of time before exploring an alternate use, which I don't think we need in there. But an additional question of how long are we closing it for with no alternate use? My other kind of statement is I'd like some slightly clearer communication on the kind of time frame of future decisions. You've got that waste minimisation plan which says we're going to talk to you about this someday. It'd be pretty nice to have, as much as Councillor Tawihan has kind of reflected, we don't like the bracketed out of district disposal. If that was bracketed out of district disposal until established in our waste minimisation plan that we're going to have in place by this date, that'd be really nice. Just some future certainty that we're actually going to do something, and we're going to do something by a certain period, and we're going to talk to you. And that's my thoughts on the landfill section. Happy with all the others.
Thank you. We can add those in.
Cara, the only thing for me was around option 3, where it doesn't indicate that consent reviews would be needed if we did reopen it, which would have a cost impact as well.
Thank you. We'll add that point in too. Okay. We're right to move on to rates affordability. And just before we... hang on. We've got rates as issue 3. So was there any feedback on that section?
Acknowledging that the wording will need to be updated to reflect the conversations we've had today about those 3 options.
Okay. So we will include further information about, so we've got boom mowing under option 2, and we'll flesh out the others. Great. That was in option 2. So we have option 1 is the 7.8% rates increase, and option 2 is a lower level rates increase, but recognising that would require cuts to levels of service. And some examples are provided there, ones that were discussed at an earlier workshop.
Just going to touch on that because I was with the Swans last night and confused about, and I may have missed it. It'd be quite easy for me to miss that. And I wasn't sure about the conversation, particularly about Victoria Park. Why is Victoria Park? We're talking about cutting the maintenance budget of Victoria Park. and I'm not sure someone can like me. If it said cutting the maintenance budget in some of our open spaces, I'd be comfortable. I'm not sure why we're just singling Victoria Park out.
So the direction we got from council was that while council were largely comfortable with going out and consulting on a 7.8% rates increase, they wanted us to provide some options to the community on, well, if you don't want a 7.8 and you want it to go down, what are some things that we would need to stop doing? And using you might remember that Excel sheet that elected members played in. And so using the ones, we kind of worked backwards from there in terms of the ones that had the most votes for yes, elected members were open to that. Why Victoria Park's on the list, I suspect, is that, Caro, just because that was one of the ones that had the most votes?
That's my understanding, but I'll double check that. Yeah.
I think it's a fair point though, Ross, that it's one of many.
Yeah, just protecting Councillor Allen and I have put our shields on because straight away they're going to say why Victoria Park? No, it's a fair comment because there's a lot of open spaces that are probably around the district that probably are used less than Victoria Park is. I'm just concerned about singling out one reserve where we say less maintenance on some of our open spaces might be more equitable.
So from memory, there were some other examples of other parks, and so what I'm wondering is, I think that rather than making it just about Victoria Park, it's these are the sorts of places that we would stop doing maintenance on, and this is the impact. But I do think it's important we've got to name them. Like we can't just say stop maintenance at parks, because then when we stop mowing the adventure park, everyone's like, "What? You didn't talk to us about that." But what I'm hearing from you, Ross, is your concern that we're only saying Victoria Park at the moment and nothing else. From memory, there was a couple of parks in Shannon. There was a couple of triangles in Levin. Yeah. Fair feedback.
Yeah, just for following on from that, I thought there were a whole range of other things on that spreadsheet that we were going to include. Or are these just intended as examples? Or, so...
So the intention at the time was to say to the community, okay, so if we want us to cut rates, what are you prepared to cut? Here are some examples. What else? And so there's probably something in the way that we visually display this, Councillor Jennings, in that people do see them as just ideas or just examples, but we also create the space for people to give ideas as well. But basically, burn mowing, community events funding, and park maintenance was kind of the stuff that you agreed on. When we started getting to the other examples, there was less consensus.
Sorry, can I just say that was less consensus to actually do it, but not necessarily consensus to go and say to the community, well, hey, do you want to understand the impact of cutting this? This is what it translates to. Because I think that's a different... So, because my preference would be to take maybe a longer list of things and actually just have them there on the table, which says what they are, and so people can also see the dollar amount and the rates effect. Because I think that's the thing that most people will look at and go, actually, cutting burn mowing 0.8% or whatever it is, is it really worthwhile? So having a longer list there of the options without too much analysis, if we're allowed to do that, I think is probably more worthwhile.
We'll put a few more options in there. What I'm thinking is that if we circulate them via email to say, here's where we think that the 6 to 7 options are, check you're comfortable. Just to kind of satisfy you, Councillor Brannigan, Brent's just pulled up sorry, not just to satisfy you, I shouldn't say it like that, but just to respond to your concern. There were so it won't just say Victoria Park, it will say Moynihan Place, Waitanere Rise Boulevard, and there was one other that we'd put. But we'll word it in a way where it's like, well, these are examples. You tell us where else you think we mow where we shouldn't.
And just to factor in Pirihira's suggestion, maybe the arterial roads, the impact if we were to maintain the arterial roads only and not the other roads, the lesser roads. That's a good big picture thing for people to look at and get a feel across the district then, as opposed to, a whole series of little parks and things.
I'm worried though we're making this document very complicated, that it's, I don't want to be thinking that they get past page 3 and think, oh, this is too much for me, I'm not going to do anything with this. You're only going to get, a certain percentage of the population reading the whole document and responding to it. And I'd just be conscious of the fact that we're starting to get really down to some nitty-gritty stuff that I don't think is going to actually have a huge amount of impact on what our final decision making is going to be.
I want to donate that too, because what I'm thinking is what we already know is that those that do participate in these processes are the same people that continually participate in these processes. So when we do get the feedback, I imagine it would be hard for us to decipher what sector of our community that's coming from. And so, something around farming and land, I'm sure we're going to have a heap of responses and maybe not one other community member respond about that issue. And so, how do we collate that information in a way that reflects the people that are engaging us? I know that's quite complicated what I'm asking, but otherwise it's not a very equitable feedback process because we're only going to have people that are engaged. Maybe there's a need to go out and engage groups that represent or work with particular sectors. I don't know, just to encourage participation. Yeah, that's all from me. Thanks.
Just on that, we also thought that we would include in the detail that people are asked to provide whereabouts in the district they are based, so that we can provide you some analysis as well, so breaking it down by parts when we come back to you. So, cool.
We'll do some work to try and put some other options and other examples in there, but keep it as simple as possible because we're already kind of asking our community so many big questions, and I think that's your point there, Bernie. But Lisa's going to talk soon about our comms and engagement approach, and she's going to talk a little bit about the citizens panels, and so I think this is an example of the sorts of things you chat to your citizens panels about.
Just a small point, Cara, on slide screen 76 of my presentation, we talk about option 1, 7.8% rates increase, and then down in the body of the paragraph we talk about 7.9. I don't really want to, I know it's
Great. So then, if we move on to the fees and charges, we'll update that with material from discussions earlier. And I also note that in option 1, we have the dog control as the figures have just been carried over from last time. We haven't updated it to the 1020 and 8090, so we'll fix that. And I'll welcome any other feedback on that, noting that we'll be making some changes following the earlier discussion. Great. No, that's all right. Yeah. And then the last one, development contributions, would be including the material there to share with people. We've taken on board the questions about the wording, and that we need to be very clear in that. Great. Were there any other questions about the final parts, working up the submission page, anything else that we should be looking at?
It's just I guess it's how we bang some language around the conversation with Three Waters, and I guess so. We're going to talk about the development contributions there, but then how do you have that language within the document to say that there's the opportunity or possibility that this won't exist? I mean, obviously, you can only make a decision on what's the information that's in front of us at the moment, but it's also making sure that people are aware that this might not happen. I guess for me, the big example is the development contribution, because that is quite significant. Although everybody in Tokomaru, etc., will know that they need this capital expend, but the possibility is it won't actually happen because it'll get changed to Three Waters. But I don't know how you communicate that. But it just about needs something in the document to say, because everyone's obviously going to be aware of it. But I don't know how you do that.
I suspect because of our audit issue, we're going to have to, in the kind of, I'd suggested to DIA that they had a letter from the Minister on the first page of our consultation document telling the community it's not our fault, but I don't think we'll get that. But we're going to have to tell our community about the legislation impact of reform, and so we might weave some of that in there in terms of we're in an uncertain environment, we don't know everything, and we're trying our best with the information in front of us, and that some things are only here for a period of time.
Thank you. If you have any other thoughts, we'll be making the final changes tomorrow before the documents are ready for audit. So please let us know if you have any other thoughts that come up before then. And thank you.
Can I just tease that out a little bit more? So when we come on the 15th, then you're going to see something that looks like that pretend pretty version in your portal, plus something like the text that you've read and given us feedback on, albeit you've given us some feedback today, which we'll take on board. As elected members, you're not going to feel surprised that this document feels like it reflects the 4 months of conversations that you've had.
Well, it simply does. So yes, from me, really. Yes, yeah. Simply does.
Thank you. I'll pass over to Lisa to talk about our consultation and communications.
We might take a 5-minute break, allow people toilets stop. There's some Kai in the ante room, and then we'll come back and talk comms and engagement, and then get into stormwater.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to run you through our draft comms and engagement approach so that you can feed into it, feel part of it, give us guidance on the bits you like, the bits you'd like us to change. In general, our communications and engagement strategy is around growing trust and confidence with our community, growing an understanding of Council's mahi through the relevant and timely channels and through authentic storytelling. For the long-term plan amendment in particular, it's about creating awareness, then informing people to hopefully create engagement and then build a community of advocates. So the main questions that we're solving for are, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this now? And why as a community member should I care? I will take you through some key pieces of information that I don't know how to, thank you, there you go. Documents that we've developed. One's a LTPA comms calendar that I'm quite keen for you guys to feed into. Carol and I have spent a wee while looking at the timings of messages, the relevant messages that we might want to put out, how it relates to the consultation document. Some of you may know that late last year we invested in Let's Corridor, which is a new community engagement software. This will allow us and has allowed us to create an online presence for this long-term plan amendment where people can go and read online in the lead up to a full consultation document for those that need more information. I'll take you through an example of the community engagement landing page and then a draft live-in water supply page. And then I'll just talk you through as well, once I've shown you the comms calendar, what it looks like in terms of your involvement, and just take you through the citizens panel and our approach to creating some focus groups. And then I might just show you a couple of examples of videos that we've been working on that are still very much draft, but will give you a flavour of what we've been, what the team's been working on. So I'll just see if this works. Don't look at my desktop, everyone. There we go. So, how might I? Sorry. We'll see if it works. It's not linking. Oh, perfect. Thank you. So, I can make it a bit bigger for everyone. This is our proposed comms approach. You'll see there's I'll just flick over to the key, but essentially we're using radio as our channel of reach to get a wide engagement across the community. We're using Facebook and Instagram to back that up with social media. We've also got some Facebook Live events, focus groups, community events, and then just key pieces of collateral. So just as context, 90% of New Zealand are using social media and are active social media users. I think it's around 95% of New Zealanders have got internet connection and use internet as a way of communicating. Alongside this, we'll also obviously be doing updates as we regularly do in the Horowhenua Chronicle and doing media releases and all sorts. But this is really just to show how we're linking radio and social media to talk about the key topics that we're talking about in the consultation document. So you may notice already that we're on air at the moment, and we've already gone out with
social post just to let everyone know that this is coming and to expect more information. So this is in our awareness phase of our comms approach. And then when we get to February, we'll look to launch Let's Kōrero, which is our community engagement platform, and we'll look to launch that with information that doesn't include the options available, because you'll all need to adopt the options before we can recommend those to the community. So this will just be about informing the community of the consultation document key topics and the sort of what we're facing into as a council and as a community. Then we kick into rates. So part of what we're doing as a team and what we're trying to get across to our community is that we understand what people are going through and that we hear them. We know that the cost of inflation is at 7.2% at the moment and is estimated to go to 7.5%. We know that Horowhenua has a mean household income that is $35,000 less than the average New Zealand household. And just to be really clear with where their rates go at the moment. So just, I suppose, trying to build an understanding of we feel that the cost of living is really hard at the moment for people, and in particular our community that's got a high deprivation index, and we've got 25% of our community that are 65 and over. And so the next sort of, we go in like week phases, so we'll do a rates intro, where do your rates go in the middle of the week, and then we go into, how much do you expect to pay to flush the loo? Because I think part of the reason that we come up against a bit of a challenge is that our community doesn't necessarily see the value that we provide. They just expect it. But if things go wrong, then they absolutely know about it. And so just trying to get people to understand the value of the services that the council provides and what it would mean if they didn't have that. So the team are working on a bit of an animated GIF at the moment for that social post. Then throughout March we're creating it, and I'll show you in a minute what happens in the region when we have a heavy rainfall event. So we've taken data from last December's rainfall event just to show what happens to our water treatment plant, what happens to our wastewater treatment plant, to our stormwater, what happens to you as a community, so that people get a feel for why the urgency. And then we've got another water post and obviously a radio ad. We're developing a graphic that shows how council has invested in Three Waters assets over time, to show that we haven't been negligent with our investment. We've actually been leading edge and cutting edge in some respects, and to show that we've invested what we could when we could throughout the years. But it's because of growth and because of the heavy rain events that we've been experiencing, we're now needing to invest more. And then you adopt the long-term plan amendment consultation document on the 15th. So I haven't told Mayor Bernie this yet, but he'll be going live on Facebook to let everyone know that it's been adopted the day after, because he's fantastic on Facebook live events. And then we'll put on Let's Kōrero a different section, so we'll include all of the options that people can vote on, where they can make a submission, all that sort of stuff. Then we just go through the various topics. So the landfill, we've had our people do some analysis to show comparative for the last year, comparative to rainfall, how many customer relationship management queries have we received for stormwater and for wastewater, and we've mapped that out and shown a heat map of what that means cumulatively to the live-in settlement as a starter for 10, but just to show, because we had so much rain last year, what that means to the community, flooding and, obviously with sewage problems. The consultation kicks off on the 27th. And then April's pretty busy. So we have our first open day, which we're still working through the details, but would like it to include a visit to the live-in landfill, the wastewater treatment plant, and the water treatment plant, and to make it as easy as possible for the community. We're toying with putting on buses for people so that they can, participate and that it's accessible for everyone. And then we sort of get into the nitty-gritty. And April's when we're anticipating having focus groups with a citizens panel, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail in a minute. And then just social posts around land value versus capital value, for example. We did a comparison last year for the long-term plan around what your three waters rates cost compared to other utilities. So just showing what you spend on drinking water, wastewater and stormwater compared to your internet or your phone connections, just to make the expenditure relevant to people. And I think I've skipped a month, but I can always go back and show you where the Facebook Lives will be, which is here. So with those Facebook Lives, it's intended that you front those alongside a subject matter expert, and that we'll curate some questions ahead of time based on what the community have asked us, but that there'll be live questions as well. And so I'll flick to the presentation to show you a little bit more detail. But yeah, let me just flick to here. So placeholder dates are tentatively March and then one in April. It's anticipated that 2 or 3 of you will sit alongside a council officer and introduce a key topic per live event, answering questions. You'll be pleased to note that of the 6,500 ratepayers that we asked wanted to be in a citizens panel, we've had 120 expressions of interest. So we've created a database, and we'll use that database to email people with an online form, just gauging their availability, getting a bit more demographic information, capturing their consent, and just gauging whether they're willing to participate in future citizens panels. Ideally, we'll split them into focus groups and have an elected member moderate the event. So that might be a different elected member for all 3 events, and then have the rest of the elected members sitting alongside the community and participating in the focus groups. Ideally, the group size will be 12, but I think will be it might be a bit bigger than the ideal size, but that's okay. And we will design the focus groups or the citizens panel sessions so that they are proactive, productive, and that people feel heard, and we get a good sort of indication of what the community are thinking about the key topics. Any questions so far?
So those 3 focus groups, you're talking there, Lisa, about the representatives with similar demographic makeup. So do I understand that correctly, that they are people who are of a similar age, income bracket, whatever, and the risk around that of not having a group where each side hears the other side. You know, the classic grey power federated farmers sitting in the same room together so that they can hear each other and have a discussion rather than just everyone who will tend to agree on what their views are.
I think that the way focus groups work well is by getting similar demographics together who can have really robust debates about the topics. I don't think that there needs to be an oppositional, like the research says that there doesn't need to be an oppositional makeup of the group, that they'll naturally debate things. Just because I'm a 25-year-old female doesn't mean I have a certain idea on a topic. I think, but at the same time, we don't want group bias, and we want people to, whether you are the loudest voice or the quietest voice in the group, to have your say. So it's a delicate dance that you have when you are doing focus groups. But I think that's the ideal. It'll depend on those people that come back to us and whether they have, whether they're available for the dates that we've set out, whether they want to be filmed or have their audio used, all that sort of stuff as well. Yeah.
And I think that there'll be those structured formal focus groups via what's been, a call out to the community around the citizens panels. But take the rates review, for example, where we know we've got interested stakeholders where we want to be proactive in the engagement approach and kind of go to them rather than wait for them to come to us. There might be a specific rates conversation that is separate to the focus group where we're inviting fed farmers, grey power, beef and lamb into a room and starting those conversations.
Well, I'll have a plug for my Māori whānau then. So I'm guessing if we're going to put such a panel together, there'll be consideration of Māori Polynesian representation in that panel. And then I'll just resonate back to my comment earlier about reflecting the different genres of our community. Because if we're going to get a citizens panel, it needs to ensure it encompasses each tier of our community. And I'm sorry if that sounds hard to capture those people, but I'm just being straight up. That's the information this council need to have, and those are the people we need to be engaging.
Is it the intention for those focus groups to potentially be live streamed? And secondly, have we considered venues or alternating venues for those focus groups so that actually we're not just here at HDC headquarters, but we're out and about?
We can certainly take on any guidance from you. We hadn't anticipated that they'd be live streamed. I think off the back of them, I'd like to create a report that helps to sort of summarise the key themes and any key sort of ideas that people have. But yeah, I think it depends on people's willingness to be filmed. Normally you would film it just for internal purposes, not for external purposes. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's pretty quiet. I might as well add my other comments in. Look, this is thank you for your presentation. I love the communication you put out there. This is really just for me sharing a whakaaro with my fellow councillors. But comms is really, really critical. And one of the things I wanted to raise when I saw this come up was communication around our iwi partners. And one of the things that I'm finding, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, is the way in which we language our council communications out there with our iwi partners. and it's, for want of a better word, it creates elevated tensions. It creates issues that shouldn't really be there. And I suppose why I'm saying it is because this council's responsibility is to all our iwi partners and all Māori that reside within our district. Now, not all the Māori that reside here can attest to being Aotearoa, Moaupoko, Rangitane. And so in that light, our messaging doesn't come across that it represents our Māori community. I'm going to give you an example. Waitangi Day celebrations. And I've spoken to my fellow councillor about it because I had some reservations about how we're languaging it. If you come to live in, it's specifically identified as a particular iwi that are here during Waitangi Day. If you go to Shannon, we have another iwi that have put their name on a celebrationary day. And then you come to Foxton, and there was no iwi marked on that event. The reason I'm raising it is because council are sometimes are actually the enablers of some of the disconnect that we're feeling within our Māori community. My whakaaro personally is that if we're going to language things from council, it has to be in conjunction with tangata whenua, or it has to be in conjunction with our iwi partners. But as soon as you start identifying individual sectors of this district, it actually creates a whole another complex layer that's not nice. And so that's really just me laying it out here really clearly for council that our role here is to represent everyone in our district. And I feel like some of the things that we're putting out there are not doing that. They're actually doing the opposite. And so I think the language that we're using in regard to how we're engaging our iwi partners needs to be reflecting who we represent. We don't sit here and represent one iwi. We don't sit here and represent one hapu. We represent our whole district, our whole community. And so I just wanted to put that out there very clearly today that council languaging is truly important, and we actually need to be assisting our community to get along, not creating mechanisms to break each other down. And so I'll just leave that there, but that's my my little comment and my one little example, because there's many, and I do get phone calls quite regularly about the language of some of our communications coming out. And I suppose I'm just trying to give us a more consistent way of acknowledging everyone in our district, but not individualising, because that's where the disharmony comes from. And unfortunately, we're the ones, like, if you're going to say to me, sponsored by to me means somebody contributed something. So I'd love to know what it was that was contributed in order to have their names put on particular events. I just need to see the language. I need to be able to track. If you're saying someone sponsored something, show me how they did it. So that's me to you. But like I said, comms is critical, and I actually want to help remove some of the stigma attached to the way in which we're communicating our Māori people in the district. Kia ora.
So I think just putting that in the context of our long-term plan amendment, if in kind of the draft consultation document or the collateral, if you see anything that you feel presents that divide or adds to that divide, just give us that feedback, because sometimes it's like, it's definitely, it's never intentional. It's always just a product of our work. So yeah, we'd really appreciate that feedback as we kind of keep going through building our collateral for long-term plan amendment over the coming weeks.
Well, one of the really good contexts was one of the oldest ministers we have in the district, Māori, actually sat me down on Waitangi Day and said she'd had enough of it because she belongs to all the iwi here. And she just said, why can't we just have Waitangi Day? Why can't we celebrate as a nation? Because actually by doing what we're doing, we're actually reigniting claims to something that we're all meant to be kaitiaki of. Kia ora.
Lisa, sorry, I just had a question. One of the things that we get feedback consistently, particularly from groups like Grey Power and that is around access to computers and the sort of the information that's available digitally. And I just wondered whether you could highlight how we're going to use the Chronicle or newspaper, because that's certainly from past feedback, particularly Grey Power, they've sort of provided suggestions. I think Councillor Tukapua and former Councillor Victoria K. Simmons, that there was consistently feedback around better using the Chronicle to convey information for those people that didn't have access to digital resources. And so I just wondered the complexity or the cost associated with taking, for example, the consultation document, the one that usually gets printed, and splitting that into pieces and almost doing like a community connection style insert into the paper over the consultation period as a way of getting it out there and putting it right in front of people, because I certainly get really good feedback about the value of that community connection as a communication tool, and I just wondered whether you had explored or considered whether it could be used as a platform for this, particularly for those older people who I don't think are, unless they come into this building and actually get a physical copy of that consultation document, they're probably not going to get all of the details around the options and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be more through snippets through radio and stuff.
We have a monthly community connection which we're going to pilot producing fortnightly if it doesn't break the team. And last long-term plan we actually had the ability to provide a submission in the paper printed, so we can absolutely do that again. In terms of putting the whole consultation document in the paper, we don't have the budget to do so. But we will be using a mix of channels to reach a wide, population of our community. What we found in the resident satisfaction survey is it wasn't the elderly population that were disengaged with council. It was actually the younger families aged around 40 that weren't contributing and weren't submitting. So it's those people that we want to reach, as well as everyone else that consumes the community connection or the Chronicle, that consumes radio, because we want a diversity of opinions who provide submissions and also provide their feedback. So absolutely we'll look into, and we'll be doing regular pieces in the paper through the community connection alongside radio and social and online. Okay, do you want me to show you a few examples? Oh.
I just wanted to ask, reflect on what Justin said before around the citizen forums, and I know you said we directly communicated with 6,000 ratepayers, but did we talk to, say, groups, or I would imagine we would have talked to different organisations and asked them if we, including Hapu and Iwi?
We, through Amber and the community development team, went out to all of our interested stakeholders and groups that we regularly deal with and asked them if they wanted to be included in the citizens panel, a representative of each of those groups.
I wasn't trying to, so I just wanted to make sure we had done that communication. And in terms of, Justin Rose's legitimate questions around Waitangi Day, I assume that they were not council organised events, that we just help communicate that they are on. We're not actually organising them or anything like that.
It's probably not fair to ask Lisa to answer that, given it sits in a different part of the organisation, but some are council and some aren't. So the Foxton one, council through our community centre and services team helped organise that at the last minute because a decision was made, they wanted to have something in Foxton versus Live In, no. we're not part of the organisation, but we had staff turn up there on the day to help. So it's different. Probably adds to Justin's point.
Excuse me. So just you were talking about the demographic of our 40-year-olds and families. Have we considered using our schools? Like, they all have newsletters. Even if it's along something, then at the office we have the plan there for them to be able to communicate or as an option.
It's a good point. We actually did some filming at St. Joseph's School and asked the students there a bunch of questions. Unfortunately, we'll use that for another time because it didn't quite fit, but absolutely using future voices to talk about future hora whenua was where we sort of, one of the ideas that we've been playing with. And it's a good point you raise, because I don't think you're ever too young to make a submission. So our school children can make a submission to the long-term plan amendment if they wanted to. And I'll take that on board and see what we can do to engage the schools.
Yeah, because I was meaning more in when our kids are potentially learning it through their schools, that we hook in their parents who are, maybe the ones that don't participate.
And we can look at that for the full long-term plan as well, and how we could incorporate that and spread the message there as well. Me, Bernie, picking up on your question, but it kind of raised an idea for me around all our community organisations, marae, schools, how do elected members feel about us emailing them all and saying, hey, have you heard about our long-term plan amendment? Here it is. If you want a counsellor to come and talk to your group, let us know and we'll organise it. So that could be, Justin going and talk to Rotary next week and you going to Kiruru Marae the following week. But it requires heavy lifting from elected members. Because officers, we can help, but community want to talk to you, not us.
Well, it confirms what Clint said before around all the events can't be expected to be held here. We've got to go to some of those places ourselves as well. And whether that be Marae or it be wherever, I do think we've got an obligation to actually go to the people rather than expect them to come to us as well.
Yeah, I think absolutely go out, and if we have a lot of responses that there's too many for elite members to go to, well, that's a good problem around engagement to have, isn't it? I just wonder whether we want to front foot some approaches to some strategic groups we might like to get ahead of. Great Power is an obvious one. I don't know, Paul in the farmers world, I'm sure there's a young farmers association or something that we might also want to try and get a talking event to, and I'm sure that there in the iwi space is an opportunity to hold some marae-based hui around just talking about what the long-term plan is about and engaging in that way. I'd support that approach. Because I'm even thinking, about other, Otaki doesn't sit in our realm, I know that, but you got a place like Te Wānanga down there that is a whole bunch of educated whānau that potentially could be contributing in a really good way to this process, but they wouldn't even know unless they're connected to one of the organisations here. So yeah, I like that idea. Kia ora.
Yeah, thank you. We'll follow that up. Okay. I'll just take you through. This is draft, but this is a design of the Let's Corridor landing page for the long-term plan amendment and annual plan. So you'll notice all of our
we might hear now, all of our radio ads are driving people to this page. So will our social media ads as well. So it just goes through. If I can scroll, can I scroll? What the long-term plan amendment is about, the key projects that we're addressing, our growth story, some key dates for the consultation period, and we can amend these based on your feedback, and also the capacity of elected members and council officers to be able to deliver on multiple events. So we might have to meet in the middle depending on where we land. And then just a little bit about our vision as a council and what we're aiming to deliver for our community. The draft project page will look a little bit like this. So just key documents. The Let's Corridor also offers the opportunity for community to interact. So we can do things like quick polls or ideas boards. What are your tips for conserving water? I've taken this out, but what are your thoughts on water meters / leak detectors? It's all really dependent on what you'd like us to ask the community. So this is just a bit of background. That's Let's Corridor, and then I'll just pop into so this is a video that Richard has been putting together, and I just want to preface it with it needs some fact checking, it's draft, there needs some final changes, but I just want you guys to see sort of what we're
the impact on our river flow and drinking water. Heavy rain.
Sorry, I'll just start it from the start and try and get rid of that top bit. How do I change the... Yeah, cool. And then not blast your ears off.
Along with a population that's growing 3 times faster than the national average, Haurawhenua has experienced several heavy rain events recently, which put significant pressure on our infrastructure. In December 2021, the Makahika catchment, or Oho River, experienced 2.7 times the national rainfall for a typical December. We have a treatment plant on Gladstone Road that takes water from the river, stores it in a large tank and distributes it via a network of pipes, valves and pump stations to people's homes and businesses. When we get bouts of heavy rain, the muddiness, or in technical talk, the turbidity of the river increases. The muddier the river water, the lower the volume we are able to treat. If the water gets really muddy, over 500 NTU in technical talk, we have to stop treating it altogether and rely on the reserve of treated water we have in our tank. The storage capacity of that tank holds approximately 1 day's worth of drinking water. During the rain event in December 2021, the muddiness or turbidity of the water got up to 207 NTU. Without people changing how much water they use, our water tanks got down to 53% full. As well as the impact on our river flow and drinking water, heavy rain can also cause flash flooding. Council received calls for help from people who rang to tell us about areas of flooding on local roads. Number of people reported flooding in and around their homes. We have trucks that act like big vacuum cleaners. They have hoses and tanks on the back of them. We call them sucker trucks. When we have an area that is flooded and people's lives and property are directly impacted, we send out teams with sucker trucks to suck the water away. In the December 2021 rain event, there was so much stormwater, the rain that runs off our roads and down the drains, that our network was overwhelmed, and more than 4 times the amount of stormwater as normal flowed into our storage network. When the network is under this amount of pressure, it is our pump stations, pump stations pump the sewage to the treatment plant to be treated, that are a critical part of the network. As a priority, because of the potential risk to our community, we will send out sucker trucks to any pump stations that are struggling to keep up with demand. In December's rain event, we deployed 21 sucker trucks to location X, Y, and Z. While we regularly carry out maintenance and repairs to our drinking water, stormwater and wastewater network, the reality is that much of New Zealand's infrastructure, our roads, water and sewage networks, were built around the 1940s and 50s, meaning the majority of the pipes underground that take our water from A to B are 50 years old, with a few as old as 100 years old. We set aside money to replace ageing infrastructure, but we are limited by the amount of rates we're able to charge ratepayers, as rates affordability, particularly in our district, where we have a higher than average ageing population and lower median income, is a major factor. This predicament has meant that we've had to, in some cases, sweat the asset. That means we prioritise maintenance, repairs and upgrades we needed most, to keep rates affordable, with the knowledge that for the rest of the network, if something breaks, we will fix it then. We're not alone in this situation, with most, if not all, other councils facing the same predicament. In our long-term plan, which is basically a big household budget, we highlighted the need to spend money on X, Y and Z in years X, Y and Z. The rain events, coupled with our growth, means that we're now asking that this be brought forward so we can start investing and building things sooner. Pick up a copy of our consultation document or visit letskorero.horawhenua.govt.nz/LTPA for more information.
So, question, is it too technical? Shall we remove the reference to NTU and just talk about the muddiness of the water?
I think turbidity is okay because it's examples.
Yep. Yeah. Those sorts of things we're just working through to try and make it a little bit shorter, because the average video it should be around 3 minutes for people to be engaged and then they sort of turn off. But that's the sort of information. What's that? Yeah, that's the sort of stuff that we've been working on.
Was that 5.5 minutes?
It's about 5 minutes at the moment.
Cause kind of where it shifted into stormwater seemed a natural place that if you're actually going to use the material, it's just two separate videos. Just in the conversation about the water reticulation before it heads into what happens in an emergency stormwater flooding situation.
To be honest though, it didn't seem 5 minutes, to be fair. I didn't think. It might be because I've got interest in it, but didn't seem that, to me, didn't seem that long.
I guess a challenge that we have is that we've got such a small but mighty comms and engagement team that our senior graphic designer, Rich, has been learning how to make this video as he's been making this video. So any changes, particularly to the stills frames, are really laborious for him. So I suppose I just will need to get a really clear steer on where we want to sit, because otherwise I might find him rocking in the corner having a cry. I think we can probably manage those conversations internally, Lise. I think really what we'd get, like the point of this was to give you a sense of this is the stuff we're working towards. We've obviously got to get the balance right about how much Three Waters heavy we are versus landfill heavy versus rates heavy, because we know how important the rates and landfill conversations are. But the key thing is that you're either giving us the steer that says, yeah, we like what you're creating, this looks cool, and if you've got particular things that you love or hate, or you'd like a pink bow on a particular letter, like let Lisa know via email. But this is more giving, like, does this feel about right in terms of the
approach we're taking to comms and engagement. If you reflect on that calendar that Lisa took you through, it's pretty heavy in terms of elected member time and capacity, and so we're wanting to check with you. Like, this is touch, feel, see, interacting with community lots. We can make that happen, but we need that commitment from elected members that you can make that happen as well. I think that's kind of part of what we needed to get out of today.
Do you want to see one more video? Just a draft one? It needs a little bit of work, but I'm wanting to gauge whether this level of detail we'd like to include in the long-term plan amendment, or whether we just use those graphs in the consultation document rather than online.
For me, Lisa, just the initial reaction to that is I probably wouldn't go for that type of video. For me, probably the messaging more around the waters space is, I think we're going to have to convey why the hell we're looking at waters, because people already know that there's obviously a lot happening in the three waters space, and so it's making the connection between this is why we're looking at it, and this is how it fits as part of this whole three waters thing, and this is why we're looking at it right now. And so, I like obviously the stormwater, making sure that we're investing in resolving some long-term stormwater issues and securing that as part of our long-term plan, so that it's understood as part of the three waters, new horizon. That's the kind of messaging that I would be looking for, rather than getting into the sort of the real detail. But that's just me. So it's probably the connection of all these. So the connection of stormwater, the connection of leak detectors, water meters, and the increased size of the CapEx program, sort of the three pillars, and just how they connect to three waters. Because ultimately we're saying, well, our last long-term plan wasn't wrong. It's just that we know so much more, and we're getting ourselves ready to transition that over to the three waters entity and whatever that. So we're putting ourselves in the best possible position to ensure that we keep getting that investment, even if council's not going to be delivering it directly. Something like that. That's the kind of, I don't know if that's possible, but yeah.
We're trying. But yeah, valid point. I think it's really hard to. So the average reading age of Kiwis is 12, and so there's a real challenge in how do we talk about the stuff that council does in a way that relates to people and how that impacts them. So I guess we can absolutely not use that video, but the intention of it was to show, hey, this is where our community is flooded. These are these are where we've had sewage incidents in our community. And this is why it's so important that we invest now, because we don't want this to happen again. We're trying to mitigate this happening again. And we know that we're going to have, I think last year was the highest rainfall in like 76 years. Paul Gaydon's done the numbers, and we've got the highest groundwater levels in a long, long time. And so I suppose it's how do you get that across that's relevant to people?
So mine is feedback then, and sorry if this is getting into the weeds, but so instead of using that kind of diagram, would be just using pictures of the streets and the street signs or something like that, so we can say, we know that there were 25 really bad spots across the district, and then you're pinging up the street signs or actual photos of the areas. And so this is what we're doing. We're proposing that we spend an extra, whatever it was, million on stormwater, so that we're ensuring that that's part of the plan, and that when the Three Waters entity takes over, that we've prioritised and we've said what's important to our community, or something, that kind of gist.
Lisa, I'm a bit reluctant to identify individual streets where we've got issues because of the possibility that people will say, oh, good, you're going to come and fix my street next week. And we know that that's not necessarily the reality. Well, eventually we will get to it. I'd rather tell the story about, okay, we've had some really bad events. A lot of people have been affected. But over the next 10 years, we're going to spend X million dollars worth of money to fix it. Are you happy with that type of thing? Rather than, and as Sam said, put pictures out of flooded areas or whatever, but just conscious of, Marlborough Street and thing, we'll be expecting, new drains or whatever next week, because we've highlighted the fact that there's actually 6 people there that have put in CRMs for their over the last year type of thing. Anyway.
Cool, I'm hearing you.
I don't mind where you're going with the messaging you're trying to articulate. So sorry, it's a counter view, because I've sat there and I've watched on my social media these little bar things that tell you who's got the largest bloody navy in the world from 1814 through to 20,021, and it's held my attention for 3 minutes and 33 seconds till I finally found out that X had the most submarines, or the world's biggest economy. So actually I think there is a place, and there are people in the community that will connect with the information about the story you're trying to tell, which is the amount of rainfall and the number of incidents on is going up, and hence why we need to respond and we need to act now. So, graphs like that show these things heading in the trajectory to justify why we have to act now is important.
Can I just ask one question to you, Bernie? Because, so you said don't identify specific streets, and I can understand your perspective on that. But Daniel has a program of work with a budget set aside, so we do actually have some specific locations that we're saying this is what you're getting for your money. This is bang for buck, and so actually, from my personal perspective, it's okay to put particular locations if they're part of the project plan to do that, because actually that is a good signal, because I'd far rather people know what is inside that, what are the big things inside that envelope of funding and what's not, potentially.
Yes, certainly areas, definitely. I'm just conscious of the fact that we'll have Warrior Rise, we'll have Shannon, we'll have Foxton Beach, we'll have Levin, all clamouring, saying, "Well, my priority is higher than yours." But if Daniel has got a plan, this is what we're intending to spend over the next 3 to 5 years or whatever, and these are the areas we're going to concentrate on. All well and good. Yeah, fine. I don't want to raise the expectation that everyone's going to get their stormwater issues fixed in the next 5 minutes, that's all.
Yeah, so not to put a spoiler on the next presentation that James will lead you through, which is around the storm force. We're in a phase now where a lot of the issues we've had have been long-standing, but off the back of the really wet period in winter, we've sprung into action, and I'd like to acknowledge the work that James and the team have done. It's pulled them away from their business as usual into an area to try and address some of these longer-standing issues. And we have got a process around prioritisation, and James will talk you through that. But the signal on the LTP is that we need another $1 million per year to start actually addressing more than just the lower level projects that we've got in there. So as we advance further and we start to tackle some of those wider considerations around the likes of Waitara Rise and create that 3 to 5 year work program, there's going to be a lot more clarity around which projects will go and subsequent opportunity for elected member engagement there around additional investment over and above that $1 million. The other key point is that there isn't certainty around what the Three Waters transition looks like for stormwater. So the current process that James and the team are taking is that we're planning now, we're responding, and we've got a plan, and we've actually had some fairly significant wins over the last 3 months in terms of projects that have been ticked off.
Any other questions before we wrap up the comms and engagement approach? I'm hearing that last video was probably too much detail for the table, and that we could convey the same message with an image of flooding with our intention. But we're on point for the first video. Yeah, and are you happy with the sort of breakdown of the key topics with certain social media posts as well, relating to radio and print? Yeah, cool.
I guess the only thing I'd add is that in agreeing to the approach, the comms engagement approach, makes me sound even more important.
Yeah. Intro.
But in agreeing to the approach, we are agreeing as a table to be part of it, because there's a number of points here where we are committing ourselves to leading the process, and so that's something the table needs to agree to as part of the whole deal.
What you can expect from us is relevant information on each subject, including FAQs, curation of questions prior to live Facebook events, a well-developed marketing and comms strategy that drives community engagement. But what we'd like from you is to lead the conversation around the key topics via planned community social media events, a unified voice driving the community to council's social media and Let's Corridor pages for more information, feedback and approval on the proposed approach, and your preference and confirmation of attendance at the Facebook Live events and the Community Open Day and the Ask Me Anything barbecues, and if we work out some additional events based on your feedback too, just to let us know what your preferences are and what events you can attend. That would be great.